friends, and welcome back to Rec at Home, brought to you by the Community Recreation Division of Arlington County Parks and Rec. My name is Miss Lizzie, and today we are going to be using a squashing method to make our very own decorative fall squashes.
Now let's remember our 3 rules for the project. Try your best. Remember, there's no perfect in making art. Be safe. Let's respect the materials and make sure that we're using them correctly. And be kind. Let's make sure our table's covered and ask for help when you need it.
Alright, so let's move on to our materials for our fall gourds. We're going to need some paper, so anything will work, recycled newsprint or just printer paper. Some paint, I'm going to be using acrylic, but you could also use tempera. We'll also need some tape. Masking tape is ideal, but painter's tape works too. We'll need some brushes for painting. I'm going to use a big brush for mine. And some sort of paint palette. Tin foil, wax paper, plastic, anything. So this is an example of one of the gourds I made. And gourds do come in several different shapes and sizes and colors, and that's the fun part of this project. You can really customize it to be any sort of gourd that you like, any color really. And gourds tend to come in these very fantastic fall colors like reds, orange, yellows, but sometimes they also come in these deep greens and purples. So definitely feel free to take any sort of liberty with the paint, the colors, and the size or the shape of your gourd. Everybody knows gourds are kind of wonky. Maybe you've seen them at a supermarket where some kind of look like this basic butternut squash sort of gourd, where others are these gigantic U-shaped kind of funky gourds with all these little grains and textures on them. And so for this project, I'm going to show you guys how to make this basic gourd right here. And just to start you off with how to think about this project, how to work sculpturally, is that we want to think of the shapes that begin to form this larger shape, this unnameable shape that is just kind of called squash or gourd. So I want you to look over here to this base part of the gourd, and you're going to notice that it's mostly kind of like a sphere. If you turn around, it's kind of like a ball shape, and so I want you to remember that ball shape when we start this project. And then this part up here is kind of like a cylinder. So what we're kind of doing here is we're taking a cylinder and a sphere, and we're kind of mashing them together to make this sort of shape. So I want to get started with some old paper, and this is some old coloring pages that I had lying around. I just have a bunch of these that I no longer need, so I'm going to recycle them for this project. And so to start this project off, we're going to use our squashing method to make our squashes. We're going to take a sheet of paper and I'm going to crumple it up in my hand, just like this. So I'm going to end up with a ball kind of like this, vaguely shaped like a sphere, kind of like that base that I told you about earlier. So we're going to keep adding on to this piece with more paper until it's the size that you want. So you can have a very small gourd or a very large gourd, depending on how much paper you have lying around. So let's keep going. So I have something a little bigger here. I'm still not that happy with how small it is, so I'm going to make it a little bigger. I'm going to add maybe 2 more sheets of paper. There we go. I'm more happy with this size. Alright, so remember what I said. We started with the sphere. Now I'm going to work on the cylinder part for this sphere so we can have a whole squash shape. So I'm going to put this aside. Alright, so I'm going to do the same method, but this time instead of just wadding it up into just a random ball, I'm going to try to have it a little more flat like a cylinder and kind of still looking at my shape that I made earlier, not going too big or too little, just trying to make something that would look right on this shape. So as I was doing this, I noticed it might be easier to fold it. So to make this shape, I just kind of folded the paper around until it was this chunky little sort of stem. I'm going to keep adding to this now. And I'm measuring again. There we go. I like that. So the way I'm going to adhere these two is first by getting a little tape so it makes it easier so these hold. So don't abandon your paper just yet. Let's grab our tape. Alright, and so I've got these 2 little bits. I'm going to bring together my shape here and find a place to just kind of tape it on together so these hold. And I'm gonna need more tape than that, for sure. There we go. That's a little more solid. All right, from here, I'm going to add one more sheet of paper to kind of really close up these sorts of gaps that we got over here. So I'm gonna move my tape aside. And just like before, I'm gonna squash the paper right over the shape. So I take my shape, put it on top of my paper, and I squish. All right. So now that I've kind of got the general shape of my squash, I think I'm done adding paper, so I'm going to push this aside and just work on my gourd here. And so for this squash, I'm going to grab my masking tape again, and I'm going to start taping all around my gourd so that these parts that are loose like this start getting taped down. So to do this effectively, I'm going to grab my shape, I'm going to squish down the paper with my hands, and then I'm just going to add my tape onto there. Oops, my tape got caught up together. There we go. So there, I'm squishing, I'm grabbing my tape, and I'm just going to tape right around some of those ridges. There we go. And I'm just gonna repeat the thing for all of my shape. I really wanna make sure I don't really have any big loose ends like this, because we're gonna paint this later, and we're gonna need a smoother surface than this. So I'm very close to finished taping, but I realized my gourd doesn't really look like this gourd yet. I think there's some parts where I can add a bit more paper, and that's the fun part of this project, where you can just kind of go back and fix things as you see it. So I'm gonna actually come in and add more paper to this base right here so it looks a little more like this. I think that looks like enough. I'm going to keep taping from here. There we go. So I'm pretty happy with the shape and the size of this gourd right here. So I am going to start grabbing my paint and setting up my area to work with either my acrylic or my tempera paint. I'm going to get my brushes and my paint palette set up here. Alrighty, so for my painting setup here, I have my paint palette, which is just some tin foil with some paint already put on there. I have my paintbrush ready and my Sharpies for details later. Alright, and so I'm going to mix up my colors, and so for reference, I'm going to look at my gourd that I made earlier, or an image reference or whatever you're using to inspire your gourd. I'm going to mostly use white, a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to start with a little bit of yellow. I think a couple 2 dots like this is good, a little dot of orange, and then I'm just going to mix this all up. Alright, so I have some acrylic paint here, and what that means is that the acrylic paint is a little bit more opaque and a little bit darker than tempera paint might be. Tempera paint tends to have a little bit more water, and so you might find that you have to do a couple of layers of paint before you can actually have the color that you want. So you're going to notice that I'm only going to go over this once, but if you need to, please feel free to take a second and go over the paint again once it's dry. So I am just starting to paint here with the color that I made. I'm pretty close here. I actually like this color a little more. It looks kind of like vanilla. There we go. So I'm just going to cover the entire surface with this color, just adding on paint liberally. And you might find there are some cracks from the paper being pushed against each other, kind of like this. I just like to put my brush in there and grab those parts too. But I don't go over all of them. I kind of really like the effect of the white underneath coming through my painted gourd here. And I'm just going to grab the bottom of this that doesn't have any paint yet on it, just to hold it a little better. If you're trying not to be messy, you might think of painting this in halves. So I'm just going to paint this first half first, just so I have a non-painted surface I can actually lay down. So that's almost all I can get with this. I'm gonna do one more go over here on the side. Awesome, so I have one side painted, one side white. I'm just gonna lay my gourd down on the white side so I can let this dry off for a little bit. So off screen I painted the other half of my gourd and now it's all dry. So I'm gonna grab my orange and brown Sharpie for some details here. I wanna add some stripes along my gourd and then I wanna add the little stem at the top here. So I'm just going to design it like I would with any sort of detail. I'm just going to lightly draw it in, and I love how like wonky the surface is so that my lines aren't going to come out perfect, and I really like that because gourds, well, they occur in nature, and nature isn't something that comes out all perfect all the time. And now I'm just going to make the little detail with the brown at the very top to make a fake stem up here. Just gonna go and make a little bump here. Awesome, and so now I have my own gourd. You can definitely try making this project with various different shapes. It's gonna be up to you to take a look at the gourd. What kind of shapes is it made out of? Think of that first, and then think of how you can combine different shapes, different simple shapes to create a much more complex, less definable shape like this gourd here. Here are a couple more examples of some other gourds I made, where some of them are like little pumpkins, others are these funky little shapes like the U-shaped gourd I mentioned earlier. Definitely take a look online and see what kinds of examples you can take inspiration from, or when you're out, take a look at some of the gourds that are out there. See what you like, and maybe snap a picture and bring it back so you can make your very own gourd. Alrighty, I hope you enjoyed this project. See you guys next time. Bye!